as you are me and we are all together. See how they run like pigs from a gun, see how they fly. I'm crying, sitting on a cornflake, waiting for the van to come. Corporation t-shirts, stupid bloody Tuesday, man. You've been a naughty boy, you let your face go long. I'm the Eggman, they are the Eggman. I'm the walrus, cuckoo-cuckoo, Mr. City Policeman, sitting pretty little policeman in a row. See how they fly like Lucy in the sky, see how they run. I'm crying, I'm crying, I'm crying, I'm crying. Yellow Madagascar, the jiffy from the dead dog's eye. Crabble like a fish right, pornographic grease test. Boy, you've been a naughty girl, you let your niggas down. I'm the Eggman, yeah, I'm the Eggman. I'm the walrus, cuckoo-cuckoo, sitting in an English garden waiting for the sun. And if the sun don't come, I'll get a tan from standing in the English rain. I'm the Eggman, they are the Eggman. I'm the walrus, cuckoo-cuckoo. Expert choking smokers, don't you think the Joker laughs at you? See how they smile like pigs in a sty, see how they snide. I'm crying, Saladina Milton, climbing up the Eiffel Tower. Elementary penguins singing Hare Krishna, man, you should have seen them kicking Edgar Allan Poe. I'm the Eggman, they are the Eggman. I'm the walrus, cuckoo-cuckoo,
Alrighty, welcome to the program, ladies and germs, and everybody in between. This is your host, Andy Gurvich. Some of you might have noticed we mentioned a couple of weeks ago that we were going to be going to a bi-weekly format for a little while because we are producing another show. I am a full-time college instructor coming to the end of the year and am buried in hundreds and hundreds of student essays about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and the prison system and all sorts of other things that I have folks writing about. And so we've been short on time here, and so we went to a bi-weekly format a couple of weeks ago, and when we returned, we lost half of you motherfuckers. So we learned our lesson that apparently 1 week is as long as many of you are willing to wait for your on-the-block fix. And so we were simultaneously pleased and horrified at the fact that when we returned, it seems like half of our audience had vanished. We had and we don't want to do that, especially now when we're in this period of competition for best podcast in the Portland area. By the way, please go vote for that the Willamette Week Reader's Choice poll for 2016. And if you're so inclined, share it on your page and maybe vote from a couple of different email addresses, like your home and work email, or if you have a couple of different personal ones. Winning something like this for us is more than just a feather in the cap. It's more than just a ego stroke, although I guess it's those two things as well. We work hard on this show because we believe in it. It's our digital love letter to our community, to our expanding community. We really do believe that at that crossroads of creativity and transformation, we can find a key aspect of our shared humanity and a bridge to honor and celebrate the dignity within each one of us. And the show is really created as an experiment and a celebration of that concept. And we don't make any money with the show. I lament that every week. It's funny, but no, it was never created for that. But to have the show introduced to a larger audience, if it wins a contest like this, many more thousands of people will be introduced to the ideas that the show is putting out there, and more importantly, to the guests, right? The authors, the creative people, the folks that we've had on that are doing interesting things in the world. They're going to have access to a whole new audience if we win this thing. So please do check it out, the Willamette Week Reader's Choice Poll for 2016. Even if you're not a Portland resident, Oregon resident, you can certainly vote for it. And check us out there. We are back on a once-a-week format. We're just going to bite the bullet, take a few more Adderall, just kidding, and make the show weekly. We never wanted to do anything otherwise. We have a new show about the cannabis industry in Oregon and beyond called Podcast Oregon, and that's been taking a lot of time from us. And so we've been getting that thing off the ground and had to pull a little bit of our time and resources away from On the Block. But we're back. We're humming along here, and we have the next in what has been a great winter and spring season for us. I've just been so pleased at the folks that have been coming on the show. We have Douglas Rushkoff coming up in a few weeks. Cheryl Strayed, the author of the book Wild, that was turned into the successful film with Reese Witherspoon. Who else is going to be on? My God, Reverend Billy Talon. Please check out his stuff in the Stop Shopping Choir. He's a phenomenal individual, an evangelist for the earth. Unlike anyone I've ever met or seen, and he'll be on the program in the coming weeks. Carrie Cohen, the controversial author and therapist, will be on the show as well. So a lot of great stuff coming up this week. A dear friend of mine, I can't wait to introduce you to this guy, Gurucharan Singh Khalsa. That's a mouthful, right? When I met this individual, my dear friend Sharon Maharis, who is an anthropologist, a world-renowned, world-class anthropologist who is part of the group, the Anthropology Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness, that I speak about regularly on this show. And she's a board member there and a longtime member and a real mentor and friend to me. And a couple of years ago, 5 years ago or so, she said, hey, a guy that I know who I wrote a book with a while back is coming back to Portland. He grew up there, and I really think you two would hit it off. And so I think you need to meet. And then she sent me this individual's info. And, even as a professor of religious studies, even as somebody who's devoted their life to studying religious things and mythological things, when I'm given contact information for somebody named Guru something, anything, my red flags start to go off, right? Whoa, who's this guy? Calls himself a guru. All right, look at him. Look at his picture. He's in the full get up there. He's got the thing on his head. What am I getting myself into? What kind of, new age, mamby-pamby, patriarchal, male-dominated mumbo-jumbo is this? I don't really think that about this stuff, but there's that voice in me, right? Don't we all have that a bit? When you come across somebody calls themselves a guru, calls themselves an ascended being, you think, oh, really? Let's go see the snake oil salesman. Let's go see how full of shit this guy is. So you can imagine my surprise and disappointment when I walked into the room. And, unbounded light shines off of this guy and just hits you in the face and in the stomach and the somatic nervous system. And what you encounter is a humble person, a funny person, and a brilliant person. Gurucharan Singh Khalsa is a PhD, director of training of Kundalini Research Institute. He's a psychotherapist, a teacher, a world-recognized expert in Kundalini Yoga, spent time in advanced institutions of higher learning in Massachusetts, studying fundamental physics and mathematics and doing research on how meditation genuinely affects the mind and the body. So a very complex individual with a varied background in the hard sciences and then in the contemplative traditions. A master teacher of the Kundalini Yoga discipline. And so there's lots to get into with the guy when I first met him, but what I was blown away by beyond his mind was his humility, his deep desire to spread empathy and compassion in the world, his accessibility, and the way that he could take very complex ideas and weave them together from multiple disciplines and traditions and make them very accessible and meaningful for the average listener. So a deep friendship and appreciation and kind of mentorship started at that moment. And don't you love it, people, when I'm thinking about my friend Sharon introducing us, when you set people up, not in a romantic way, although I guess it applies to that as well. But, you think, oh, these two people should meet. And because they're really going to hit it off and they have a lot in common, and then they do, right? And then it's a very satisfactory feeling to be an instigator of that kind of entanglement. And we talk about that in the episode a little bit. So Gurucharan Singh Khalsa, a wide and varied and heady conversation, but one that I think if you strap yourself in and just give yourself over to it, you're going to really enjoy. Whether you're a practitioner of meditation or a believer in any of these things, I just think he explains them in a very practical, very real, and non-hocus-pocusy kind of way that takes these concepts that humans have been contemplating and working with for millennia and just lays them on the table for you to explore along with us. It is an absolute core class in transformation, so fundamental to everything that I think the show is and want the show to be about, and we're just so happy that he came on with us. Stay with us over the next few weeks, folks. We got some great guests coming, including this one. We'll be introducing a segment this week that is a kind of calendar for events here in the Northwest, literary events and other things that we find of interest that we want to support and make you aware of. And so if you have, once you hear that, if you have suggestions for that, please do send those our way. And many of the guests that are coming on have been guests that folks have recommended, for instance, Carrie Cohen. So please keep the guest recommendations coming. Many of you have sent along some recommendations that I haven't responded to yet. It's not because I don't love you, and it's not because we're not going to go ahead and incorporate those folks into the show. It's just that we're a little bit behind schedule with booking and some of that kind of shit. Not going to bore you with that. So enjoy the program. Gurucharan Singh Khalsa, the second U is silent, and so you do not say Gurucharan. It's Gurucharan. A Northwest native, a wonderful friend, a teacher, a leader, and an all-around fantastic fucking guy. On the Block Radio presents Gurucharan Singh Khalsa, folks. We hope you enjoy it. See you next week.
Welcome to On the Block with Andrew Gurovich, a podcast about authentic people doing beautiful things. Enjoy the show.
All right, folks, welcome to the program. This is your host, Andy Gurovich, and our guest this week is Gurucharan Singh Khalsa. Welcome to the show, friend.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
When we started the show, I say this a lot. I made a short list of folks that we wanted to have on that we thought really embodied the meaning of the show and the focus of the show, which is studying the crossroads of creativity and transformation. And you're a person that, to me, really embodies that in so many ways. I think of Einstein's quote when he says, "The rational mind is a faithful servant and the intuitive mind was a sacred gift." And when I think of people that do work that really embody what I would call whole brain mentations, whole brain thinking and integrative thinking that bring the intuitive mind and the scientific mind together, you are really one of those people. So I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
I want to talk later in the program about entanglement and non-locality, but just and we're going to talk about all of the ways people like me and others misapply those terms. So let me do that now and see if you correct me. I love the fact of how we met and some of the things that it led to. We have a mutual friend, Sharon Mihari, who's a wonderful anthropologist and writer. And
she's great.
And you folks worked on a project together, on a book together years ago.
Yeah, we did the Psycho-Spiritual Clinician's Handbook for the Alternative Treatment of Mental Disorders.
Wow.
It's the longest title we could think of.
Talk a little bit about that book and your participation in it.
Sure. Well, Sharon and I were co-editors, and I contributed some chapters, and we talked with a lot of people at that time, which was back around 2000. And we were trying to say, look, there's a lot of ways that you can call on the inherent power of integration and healing in each person, and that has to be part of the model.
Yeah.
If you do that, you have a sustainability of that person's capacity to find wholeness, which we would call healing. Curing is different. There are plenty of things that can cure different things, and then there's things that heal things. Or as I used to say, look, we're all going to die. This is pretty, maybe someone thinks we won't, but pretty much.
Still struggling with that one. But
yeah, struggling with that. I know.
Yeah.
Well, this particular trip will end.
Yeah.
But you can die healed or you can die not healed because something will get you. But there's a capability of us to have a wholeness of presence even under the processes of transformation, which are kind of built into the very creativity of life. So life and death, birth and death are all part of that. So how do we reach into that place? Because when we're afraid, when we're contracted, when we're under too much pain, trauma, then we get these sort of contractions, right?
Yeah.
Of our senses, of our sense of self, of what we believe and our capacities. So the idea was that there's a lot of traditions and wisdom traditions that use techniques like meditation in one form or another. And so we're trying to lay a foundation. And so we had a lot of different voices come in from my side as an expert in Kundalini meditation and yoga, and Sharon, and we had Buddhists and so many different things would come in. So that was really the purpose, was to start creating a bridge forward in a way of thinking about that. And we applied it to a number of different problems that people have in just coping in their lives. When something is disruptive in a way that doesn't help them reach wholeness.
Yeah.
And how could we help with that in different ways? So that was the purpose of that. And, I've been a clinical therapist for, a long time, near 40 years, I guess. So I've always had this devotion to the miracle and the mess that people are. And I always say you have to have both. We're very messy. We're cobbled together out of infinity and the localities that we're in. We're cobbled together from our histories and families and our imagined futures. Well, all of that mix is fantastic. And in each, if you can perceive the uniqueness of that person in that process, it triggers the seed of a kind of expanding natural force of wholeness, which is healing. So how do we start to talk about that, start to engage the conversation? And so and Sharon was, the most authentic person who was out there healing people, and women in pain in Palestine, and in places all over the world. So I loved her.
Something else, yeah.
Her ability to explore and the way she'd understand people through different cultures, and above that, her commitment to actually go there and be and do things. And that's what attracted me to work with her, and also for both of us to write that particular contribution.
I met her, just a little bit of convergence here. I met her at an academic conference for the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness in New Orleans. I eventually became, and still am, a member of their board of directors. And it's a group of anthropologists and other folks that study consciousness. And I went to deliver a paper about the Chauvet Cave and Paleolithic cave art, and she was there. And the keynote speaker that year was a guy named Richard Katz, who works, you know Richard's work? He works at First Nations. And he had a book out, a university in Canada, he had a book out called Synergy, Healing, and Empowerment that looks at indigenous healing models that use narrative medicine and these other things that are synergistic, that the more the community uses them, they strengthen. It's not a kind of diminishing return model like a resource-based healing model like we have in the U.S. with a healthcare system that the more you use it, the more it is depleted, the more expensive it becomes. But in these synergistic healing models that separate healing from cure, the more you use it, the stronger these bonds become, the stronger these communal bonds and healing bonds become. And so it's fascinating stuff, and it overlays exactly with what you're talking about.
Yeah, nicely said. I like the way you put that. You know, just as a side note, Sharon and I have kept in contact, of course, over many years, and I followed her journeys and several of her books about women and empowerment and healing. And then one day we found, and she was in Costa Rica, and she was teaching internet classes and things. And then it turns out I'm now a professor of contemplative science and interdisciplinary dialogues with Chapman University. And I work with the Institute of Quantum Studies there. And lo and behold, she's actually a spin-off, an associated university with Chapman in the same area.
No kidding.
Yeah, no kidding. And wow. Yeah, it's just, you know, maybe it's statistically probable somehow, but it was just fascinating because we got to see each other again. And an old friend of mine from here, who's a famous economist now, I was raised with him here in Portland when I was a kid. And it turns out he is also teaching at this little place called Chapman. And he's an economist doing all these works. It's funny how the strings of life weave together, and you often don't see, you know, you see the underside of the carpet, and you see all the little tears, and then until you get above it and see it over time, you can't see the pattern. And then it hits you. You know, it's like, oh, there's a kind of, not just the sense of coincidence, that's different, but a sense of correctly emergent meaning
and purpose.
You can, yes, it has. You have some fealty to it, and it has some destiny in it. And between these two, you end up with a place of heart and surprise and delight, and just knowing what the next step is. And so these have been all part of my life here.
And I can't help but think I have a question for you about that. But Sharon had intuition that you and I should meet, and she was the one who said you two should get together. And then after we met, soon after that, I had the intuition that you had to meet this guy, Brian Rill.
Oh, yeah, right, sure.
And at least hearing it from his side, this has become vastly a very important and fruitful and productive and nourishing relationship in his life. And this is so great to hear, because it's like when you try to set people up on a date and it goes well, as opposed to like horribly and they're screaming at each other, right? When you think I have an intuition here that these two folks will provide something very important for one another, and then it works that way.
Yeah, Brian and I have become, I would call it catalytic friends for a creative space. And he's in a real different area in design thinking and consulting, and I did about 15 years or so working in consulting things with companies and helping people become more people in there. So it's all synchronistic and beautiful.
And Brian said that when you got together last, your wife was laughing, and she said, "Boy, you just act exactly like he did 20-something years ago."
It's true. Yeah, I know. We're like two hard drives, interchanging at rapid speed.
That's funny.
Finishing each other's sentences, adding things. Yeah.
The reason when I brought all this up, other than it's great to talk about those folks and the work they're doing and where it overlaps with yours, but is that and we'll get into this more a little later, but just one question: is that an appropriate application of the word entanglement in terms of how it might apply out into the lives and relationships of people in the world, as an application of what the kind of work folks are doing in the quantum world, or is this one of those woo-based misapplications of the word? Or is it both?
Both is a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that...
I wish folks could see the smile on your face right now after I ask that question.
Well, conversations exist at different levels.
Yeah.
And one thing we take when you go cross-discipline in different fields is we get metaphors. And metaphors give us a kind of a domain map of action, how we are, what our next step is, what we're related to. So I think... even though there is a lot of woo, as you put it, in all these ideas, you got to go, well, what's the good part of the woo, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Entanglement in the sense that in some ways we share far more profound connections than we tend to be aware of. That's certainly true. That's psychologically true.
Yeah.
It's true in physics, too. There's a lot of non-local and things that seem at a distance to us that nonetheless affect us profoundly. So we know that from complexity theory. What happens in a globalized world, and there is many, many elements, and effects can happen way out of our normal way of thinking or awareness or our level of perception, and nonetheless have a huge power. And in that context, an individual action, one choice, one thought, can also ripple in ways that give you enormously interesting unintended consequences besides the intended consequences, right? So I do think that one of the things that we all face is that the globe really is in this amazing time to try to understand in some, how should I say, more communicable and tangible and experienced way in the modern times, these times, how we are connected and what that really means. And so for me, that's certainly been one of my drivers, from the time I started in, science as a kid, I suppose. And I took up yoga and meditation for, 40 years all over the world.
Yeah.
Yoga was union, bringing things together. So the non-local that we can't see and can't figure out just locally, and the local, the personal and the transpersonal. All of these things are
a reunion of opposites.
Yeah, so it's not entanglement in the physics sense of what that means, but in the sense of the metaphor that says, are there these connections, and can we, this is my interesting question, can we, by changing our context that we're in, or the perceptual mode that we're having in our body and our mind, have access in a valid way to a wider range of these kinds of connections and their significance? Can I actually sense in some useful way my non-locality, my complexity with the world? And why would I sense that? Someone said to me,
how would you know when you were?
Yeah, how would you know? Because perhaps you just drift off into fantasy land. If you can't see it and you can't test it very easily, you can pretty much make up any theory you want. Right? But on the other hand...
Maybe you just smoke some really good shit. Yeah.
Sure.
How do we quantify...
But in my own experiences and in traditions, we have all kinds of phenomena that I don't believe can be easily reduced to purely illusion or all these other things. That's perhaps taking the excellent tests that we do have in psychology and taking it a little too far. So I'm curious where human capacity to be sensitive, to be connected, to be intuitive and analytic, where is that thing? Where is this next step of maturity as culture and as humans? Where is that leading us and being with us in this next thing? So I feel a profound commitment, I guess, to try to, I guess it's to create a moment. That's what it is. Life is lived sort of in moments. And part of the whole physics thing I do is re-understanding what it means to have a moment, and what it means to have meaning within that in the effects. So I love to do things, whether it's counseling or meditation or consulting or physics, that helps us create an experience on one side of that moment that reveals our potential, our connections, our unseen knowledge. Because if we take our unseen and our seen and we can have it with a clear self that's not too messed up in terms of our own conflicts, it becomes a kind of wisdom. It becomes something that has a sense of flow and meaning in each step that we do. And so in that context, I think that the whole conversation of physics terms, entanglements and all this is there. What you were talking about wasn't so much entanglement as synchronicity, the Jungian term, where there is some profound way in which meaning exists in our connections in ways that we don't know. And yet, we recognize them. So in the old yoga terms, we'd say there's a point where, of course, you have knowledge and you learn it and you constantly learn. And then there's a different kind of knowing. So I say there's a different kind of knowing where you simply recognize it. You don't know it. You recognize it. Now, that to me I find very interesting, that we always have these, at least, there's many, but let's say these two main sides, where we know something sort of concretely, we can kind of measure it, we can use certain experiments for it, and then there's this side where you can still measure it, but you can't perceive it in the same way.
It's when Martin Buber talks about the sacred, and he says we don't hear the word you, but yet we still feel addressed very formally and very concretely.
Nicely written and a beautiful writer.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about your upbringing before we go to our first break, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Yeah, you grew up in Portland.
I did.
And I want to ask you about your name, your title, Gurucharan Singh Khalsa. I want to ask you about the person you were before that. And if you
that.
Yeah, and how you came to that title and how you came to the tradition that reflects that title.
Okay. The short story is, in the primeval times of origination, I was given the name Michael Follis.
Okay.
And
when giants walk the earth.
Yes, when giants walk the earth. And I like the name Michael to this day because it was, as I was told, the archangel and the one that guarded what is true and false and what's discernment with the sword. And I always thought, well, yeah, I get that.
That's cool.
I like to figure out how I'm fooling myself and how I'm not. I can do that, Michael. But along the road, in my quest, I suppose, to cultivate consciousness and techniques and learning, I became the primary teacher, I guess, and trainer in Kundalini Yoga and stuff. And as part of that, one of my teacher at the time, Yogi Bhajan, was a Sikh, and I had gotten introduced to that tradition, and I liked certain parts of it. The universality of it, respect for women. If you can't see God at all, you can't see God at all. I like the fact that besides being nice, there was a kind of courage. There was a courageousness to the dignity of the self, as you at the same time have a profound humility before all that you don't know. And so this commitment to kind of service and to being there. And I rather like the tradition because the particular writings and the scriptures and so on that went with that, as far as I know, you might know better, actually, it was kind of the first inter-religious scripture because it has in it Sikhs and Hindus and Muslims and so on.
Yeah.
So that the focus of that was an experience.
Yeah.
And I used to have a motto. I say, no concept without a discipline and no discipline without an experience. So I don't like to separate those. So I found in this that there was a way to be where I like to be, which I guess you'd call it living on the mystic boundary. Okay. And to the degree that at that time, that the tradition or the particular part of it that I built here outside of India and the US and around the world, to the degree it allowed that creativity and that ability to be authentic and in the boundary of things, the boundaries, the overlaps. I thought, this is great. And so I became a minister and one of the founders of Sikh Dharma in the West, and wrote a bunch of things. I think the first thing I wrote was interpretation of the some of the writings as a quantum technology of shifting consciousness, the use of primary sound categories.
I love these titles.
Yeah, I know they're long. I know, it's really good. But that's really, so as a minister, just like in a lot of traditions, you take on a journey, and you get a name for the journey, just like a priest or a pope or somebody.
Sure.
You take on a name. So Gurucharan, I liked again. Guru was wisdom, right? Charan is feet. Gurucharan, to be at the feet, the support of the teachings or the wisdom. I guess it means don't get a big head either, because you're at the feet.
I like that, especially at the beginning of, people worshipped at the feet of Christ. The Buddhapada images that were first around after the Buddha's disappearance or death. There's something very profound, Christ followers washing the feet of each other.
So Gurucharan, Guru,
wise way to walk the earth.
Yeah, learn the traditions of transformation. Gu is darkness, Ru is light. Guru is the technique. Guru are the techniques of transformation from darkness to light, from unknowing to knowing. And Charan, stay humble, because if you don't, you always get hypnotized by what you became an expert in. So it says avoid the expert problem.
Yeah.
And do that by being with people and with Sangha and with other folks. So that was really the tradition that came from.
And last question before we go to break. You I know that you had, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm remembering correctly, you had a background in mathematics where you were either at Harvard or MIT for a while. Is that correct?
No, I went to Harvey Mudd College, which is in the Claremont College in Southern California, and Claremont Grad School, and later Boston University. And I did, when I was in Boston for many years, I also instructed in meditation and psychology and stuff at MIT. So I had a lot of students there who I worked with for like 15 years, many of whom are, actually one of whom is in the Institute of Quantum Studies that I'm now working with at Chapman. So,
no kidding.
Who knew,
More synchronicity.
We'd have very late night conversations at 2 a.m. arguing about different things. And lo and behold, years later, we can actually make progress on some of that early metaphysical stuff all the way down to actual physics and experiments. So it's
I want to ask you about that.
Who thought we could do that? I mean, seriously. So that's what I started. And I went to Sunset High School here in Portland. And I just want to point out that I say to this day, I got a great education in that public high school. When I was still in school, I went with my teachers to the training at Reed College. So I was taking organic chemistry in that when I was in college. I helped teach class in math, at PSU. So there was a openness at that time to, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And so I was able to enter into one of the top 3 schools in the country in engineering at the time, and start out with like triple majors. So I focused on mathematics and chemistry and physics, and then minors in psychology and philosophy. And that way I could go to all the schools, like Pomona for the philosophy, Pitzer College for, radical social opinions. I lived in the very first co-ed thematic corridor. That was a radical idea in those days at Pitzer College. So I was a mudder, Harvey Mudder, and made a quote honorary Pitsy.
Way to make a political statement and put yourself out there and live in a co-ed dorm.
I was pretty active in my political opinions during that period of time. It was the 60s.
Right.
No credit to me.
What I'm hearing here too is exactly what you're saying. I mean, so you're studying engineering and mathematics on one side, but then psychology and meditation and these things on the other. And so were you already seeing the connections and how one thing was informing the other at that point?
Sure. For me, it's about people. How do we live in our heart? What's our human potential? And this gap that is sort of artificially created in a lot of ways between, quote, hard sciences and physics and foundational work, and then the psychology that really makes a difference in people's lives, and
quote unquote soft science.
Sure. I help design and work in programs for addictions. You could see Tommy, my friend, has done Recovery 2.0 on the web. You'll see all these interviews.
Well, when we come back from the break, I want to ask you about the book you wrote and some of the work you did in showing the clinical benefits of meditation and a little bit more about yoga and that stuff. But before that, last question before the break, do folks from the neighborhood or do anybody from the old days still try to give you a hard time and call you Michael, or are folks respectful and call you the name you've chosen for yourself?
Well, they're respectful if they say hello to me. I don't care what they call me. I mean, I'm Portland. I'm easy breezy. It took my wife a long time to figure out how come I'm so relaxed. I said it's because I was raised in Portland, and I would for many years wherever we were living, like in Boston, I'd look out and I'd say, "Oh, look, it's beautiful. It's sunny." She says, "What dictionary are you using?" And then she came here the last 6 years, and she went, I finally understand your dictionary. In Portland, if there's a small blue spot over in the far distance, everybody points at it and says, it's sunny.
It's sunny, and gets the sunscreen
So I love it. My father, one last comment.
Sure.
My father, in terms of local things, he was a Columbia River pilot. And he worked his way up as, working hard stuff in the Aleutians and crabbing and then tugboats up here. And then he became president of the Columbia River Pilots at one point. And
Was he a bar pilot or just the river?
No, he was a river pilot.
Okay.
And he was pretty amazing. He had really high character. I respected him a lot. And he was just kind of, I mean, I saw Portland from the working Portland end when it was all docks and working. And so that, and then I was away from Portland after I was 18. I didn't come back till 6 years ago. And it's now like gentrified and different, and the whole economy is different.
Yeah,
there's still ships. And, and I saw something about him actually when I went to the museum in Astoria.
No kidding.
Which, yeah, everybody should go there. It's wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, figure out how many ships are down at the bar there.
There's several thousand.
Yeah.
There's a couple thousand. I want to actually say something to you about that when we come back from break, but if we don't go to break, we never will. So you can sit with us for a little bit?
Sure. Go for it.
You're listening to On the Block Radio, folks. Your host, Andy Gurvich. Our guest is Gurucharan Singh Khalsa, and we will be right back after these words.
Thanks for listening to OTB, a digital love letter between what is and what is possible. More after this.
All right, this is Mike D with OTB's weekly events calendar. Right now. This week, Tuesday, May 17th, Salon Skid Row presents Friends of OTB Lydia Yuknovich and Dami J. Shoemaker, along with Sin Adeline, Kirsten Larson, Daniel Elder, and Rios de la Luz for this week's reading at The Corner Bar, located on the corner of 4th and Alder in downtown Portland. The reading starts at 7 p.m. and is free. Check the Salon Skid Row Facebook page for details. Also, Wednesday, May 18th, Jenny Forrester's incomparable Unchased Readers series celebrates women and women-identified authors for this month's reading at Literary Arts, also in downtown Portland. The event begins at 7 p.m. and is also free. Check the Literary Arts website or the Unchased Facebook page for details. On Saturday, May 21st from 5 to 8 p.m. at the Crush Bar on Southeast Morrison, join MCs Gigi Little and Stephen O'Donnell for the 16th installment of Burnt Tongue. Burnt Tongue is a quarterly literary event created to honor the incredible writing teacher and author Tom Spanbauer, who founded the Dangerous Writers Group. A $5 suggested gift at the door. Check out the Burnt Tongue Facebook page for updates on the lineup. Looking forward into June, TEDx is bringing its signature brand of innovative, thought-provoking presentations to Revolution Hall on June 18th. Tickets can be purchased at TEDxMountHood.com. That's TEDxMTHOOD.com. Also, June 25th from 7 to 10 p.m. at Refuge PDX, come experience Art Beyond the Gender Binary. This art show promotes awareness of transgender and non-binary issues and rights. The theme of the show is Gender Outside the Norm. The event is all ages and free to the public. On the horizon, catch astrophysicist and round-earth apologist Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about movies, culture, and the universe. September 19th and 20th at the Keller Auditorium. Tickets available through Ticket West or the Keller Auditorium box office. For more information, check out our website or Facebook page at On the Block Radio. Well, I'm producer Mike, and that's what's happening on the block.
Salam, this is Gurucharan Singh Khalsa of the Kundalini Research Institute. People ask this question. When you read Japji, which is one of the things we do in our yoga sadhana, as well as in our Sikh sadhana, this mantra of Japji is absolutely beautiful. And right near the end, Guru Nanak says something. He says, you have to do the hard work, the churning of the Nam, this churning and going into this repetition of sound, where the words take you beyond your own limited consciousness into your infinite consciousness. So why does he say the hard work? Why is it difficult? Now this is interesting because many people begin to meditate and understand meditation as going into, say, a positive state of mind. Have a good thought. The world is beautiful. I am great. God has blessed me. I'm going to have a good one. I might even win the lottery today. So there's a lot of kind of magical thinking that goes along with meditation. But meditation, as represented in Japji and as Yogi Bhajan taught us, is a lot of hard work. It's hard work for two basic reasons. First, as soon as you change any pattern, your own subconscious comes up against you. If you go to work the same way every day and then you decide to take a new path, you might find yourself falling back to the old one, your habits. So there's a certain amount of momentum in our minds that we have to retrain. That takes an effort. But more than that, when you really meditate, you provoke your own thoughts that you have not paid attention to. So not only are you changing, let's say, a habit or a frequency, you're also allowing a confrontation between you and all the things that you didn't notice getting by you. Now, the understanding of this is very simple. We have thousands of thoughts, impulses, feelings. These are going through constantly. Now we can actually watch this in our brain now. We can look at the alertness of the brainstem. We can see the levels of activity going on. We know about the length of time it takes to sense the beginning of a thought, in a certain number of milliseconds. Now, how many of these do we have a sense that I have this thought? Maybe 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000 of these impulses and thoughts. But every time we have a thought, the Guru would tell us that every single thought has an effect, has an action. And so you're having a huge amount of, let's call it momentum or psycho weight that accumulates with all of these thoughts heading in different directions. So when you meditate, you're calling before you. You're putting yourself on the throne of consciousness and you're saying, oh, thoughts who are the subjects of my kingdom, come before me and let me just assess what's going on and do we agree with you or do we not? It's that's the hard work. You establish a frequency with our Guru Mantra. You're going Vaheguru, 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 and with it is an automatic feeling of vastness, connection, humility. Before that, where you're not judging, you're not reacting, you're not saying, I like it, I don't like it, but you bring before you every thought as if you had the responsibility, the stewardship, to say, do I put my whole consciousness behind that thought? Do I agree to the emotion that came up? You'll have every emotion, things you like, things you don't like. That's not the issue. The issue is, in the consciousness, do we qualify that? And do we now agree to put our commitment and heart behind one thing or another? That is meditation. So meditation is quite a process. We have to learn to recognize what's in our mind. We have to learn to have a relationship to it. We have to filter it at a frequency of a higher consciousness that we accept. And as you do that, pretty soon the mind becomes more and more clear, more and more ready to become a servant. To say, what is it your soul speaks? How can I serve that? How can I take the words of my own consciousness as a hukam to deliver my active spirit in my life? And this is both the yogi practice and the Sikh practice.
right, folks, we are back with Gurucharan Singh Khalsa, and when we went to break, you were saying something about your father and the work that he did, and that's one of the fascinating things to me is talking to people about their life and the work they do and how it relates to the work that their parents did. And I found so frequently, especially when I talk to creative people or people that do work in transformation, that, and maybe this is true of other folks as well, that they're either running towards or away from what their parents did and who their parents were. And so I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. I mean, I guess you did before the break, talking about the respect you had for your father and how it grounded you in a kind of working class reality of what life was and what Portland was. But how else did that affect your desire to go study meditation and consciousness and people and what makes people work and, like you said, the messiness and the sacredness of people?
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess all I'd just say about him is he was a man of high integrity. And I was just today sorting through, my mom died a couple months ago, and we cleaned out everything. You look through the old pictures, right? Yeah. And, it brings back memories, but I remember him. And everything he did had this ability to stay steady and to have an integrity. And I found that, and I often said, I guess it was because of his influence, that I don't think talent is the most unusual thing, or being spiritual, or having extraordinary experiences. I think a lived integrity is what I would call bliss. And now to have lived integrity, you have to have some sense of yourself. And you have to understand the dynamic of you in the conditions within you and the circumstances that you participate in and create. And so I think there's something about that, and I certainly am embedded in myself, I would say. A lot of, let's call it those metaphors, like we said at the beginning. So, I couldn't, I could not steer a ship or be a pilot. I mean, I was amazed at what he could do. Sometimes he'd have 4 tugs, 6 tugs, amazing. He'd be on there, I'd be on the river with him, and the fog was so thick, as they say, how thick was it? It was so thick that you couldn't see the deck of the ship. And so these were times where there wasn't much radar. I looked at his notes, and he would nonetheless guide the ships. He knew precisely the depth, the channels, the currents, the smell, all that in order to be that. So it reminded me of the human capacity in a way, the discipline that had to be there. So I like discipline to develop these capacities, like the Polynesians and how they had to travel long distances. So I think I like that. I don't think I was running away from that. I definitely knew I couldn't do what he does by any means. And we certainly had our battles because he was from World War II and the Depression and this, and he basically said, be normal, get things done, do this. Right. Don't make a stir. And I was like the revolutionary from planet Xenon or something. And so on one hand, he was very proud of that, but I was... from the time I was very young, I mean, I was interested in science and how things work and, all the things a kid does, right?
I wrote a piece, I'm still working on it, an article I'm working on about the Columbia Bar. And in it, again, I guess I'm just fascinated with these metaphors. And one of the things that I'm fascinated with is where the Columbia River smashes into the Pacific Ocean, and there's the water doesn't mix immediately. It's very brackish, and it creates these 40, 50-foot swells, and there's thousands of tons of sand coming down. The channel has to be dredged regularly, and then it still fills up with sand. And so there are these bar pilots that have to navigate the channel, and they take ships back and forth. Either way, the number one place in the country where grain leaves the United States to go to the world, and so it's an extremely active port. And as you were saying, 2,000 ships at the bottom of it, and to be able to navigate that, to me, was such a symbol, such a metaphor of the shamanic journey of being able to go, into the heart of the individual, into those places of conflict, our divine self, our animal self, our immortality, our mortality, those twin aspects of things that smash together and sometimes don't blend very easily. How do we navigate that within the self without sinking into depression, without getting stuck on a bar, right? I just thought this is such a metaphor for living a life of integrity and a spiritual quest to bring one further into oneself and into transformation. And I wanted to ask you about yoga in that context, because my understanding of it is exactly what you said before. To yoke together is to bring the person back into connection with a fundamental component of themselves that for some reason they've lost. And the 4 yogic paths that when I teach a world religion class, teaching the jhana path, the path of wisdom, Raja Yoga, the physical psychic discipline, karma, or bhakti, and then there's Kundalini, right? And it has its own category over here. And I wonder if you can maybe speak to it as a tradition, your understanding of what it does to the individual and why one embarks on this path, and how it's a path of transformation for the soul and for the body, and how it does what I think it does, which is pick a person up where they are and bring them further into themselves and make them a clearer, less disconnected version of the person they are.
Yeah, nicely said again. Yes, I agree.
There's like 9 questions in there, I realize, but feel free to go wherever you want to go.
Well, I would start with your metaphor of the bar. What's fascinating with the bar to me is that whatever your local map is of the bar, by the time you get to the bar, it's changed.
Yeah.
So you already know going to the bar that your local knowledge is critical, and yet
irrelevant.
That it's not the territory. But so you need that. And so there's this interesting challenge. You have to know yourself. Why? Because the unpredictability. And the stress, and meeting people from all over the world. So we're on ships from every country. They don't all think the same or eat the same or whatever. So you've got a local condition of knowing that changes, and then I'll have what I'll call the non-local. You have the waves coming from all over the planet, from the global patterns of the seas and the winds and everything else that are going on, and you have to have a intuitive sense, because you can't really know that whole global thing. I mean, we're better with satellites and all of our high computation now. But even so, if you're on the ocean and you're just following those maps really well, you end up with a lot of ships go down, because there's a lot of factors you can't, or we don't know at this point anyway, how to put them into the computational models. So a pilot then has to have both this presence or relationship, I guess, to the clarity of themselves, and local knowledge and non-local. And it is that kind of guidance. Now, remember I said I like my life anyway, if I look at my life, I've always lived kind of on the boundary, meaning the intersection of 2 domains. So even I'm an interdisciplinary professor, looking at questions between and among disciplines, right? Okay. And so in a sense, the bar is the ideal place for that. From evolutionary point of view, where do you get some of your most rapid evolution? Well, at the boundaries of microclimates. Right? Because now you have to sort of rally all of the resources, and you don't know exactly, you literally don't know what's going on, so you throw all kinds of stuff at it, and you see what happens.
That extreme level of chaos and unpredictability is also extreme potential for creativity.
Exactly. And so there's going to be plenty of people who would not like to live on a boundary. Okay, because we also have an instinct of security and the needs that we all are sharing the same language or the same issue. Now, in the world today, what do you have? You have boundaries showing up in living rooms where there shouldn't be a boundary. There's a sudden intersection, a sudden coming together, a crossing over at least, of what? Religions, cultures, times, intentions. I mean, and it's amazing. This is the internet time. This is the population of the world. It's our whole consciousness. So I personally think we're in a highly evolutionary time where we might make some very good decisions and have some tremendous creative futures we can't even imagine, right? And we could also kind of wipe out. That's quite possible too.
That seems to be
the nature of the bar.
They
don't all make it. And we may or not make it, or we may. But we have. But I believe deeply, we have the potential to make it even better than we can imagine. So we need all of that stuff about really knowing who we are. Now that's where yoga and all this stuff came in for me, and the applications of psychology. Why? Because I was with some of the smartest people around, and I was in college, and I saw some of them, crash and burn with drug use, for example, or other problems that had to do with drugs. But they were very smart. I mean, incredibly talented, and yet there was a personal balance that couldn't quite hold up. So there's a certain need for manners and mannerisms of an integrated self. To be able to hold and honor the treasures that you discover on your short life. And so I said, all right, maybe this yoga meditation stuff would be helpful. Now, add to that, and to get to the Kundalini that you asked about, add to that just my own experience. I experienced what people call subtle realms, I guess. Ability to suddenly know something I really shouldn't know, but sure enough, I knew it anyway, that kind of thing. And I always resisted following that too far. Like, every psychic knows everything in this. I found a lot of hucksters out there.
Yeah.
So I preferred things that weren't secret, that were testable. That was my science side. I resisted a lot of things where people had initiations and things. And Kundalini, I found, kept coming up, everywhere. That there's this thing, this potential of growth and awareness of Kundalini. And nowadays there's a lot of beautiful stuff written about it. Those days you had to find like the Bodhi tree in LA or some, obscure little shop that had these things. They had to learn more Sanskrit and stuff, which I did, and look at all these, it was a journey just to find out about this stuff. And now it's like on your Apple Watch. But so the journey.
There are meditation.
The journey part is sort of, as far as knowledge, is not so much there. But the need for experience and for maturity is still there, because that's in each of us uniquely coded, right? So that's where I started, and I came across Yogi Bhajan, and there was no initiation, and he said he was teaching Kundalini Yoga, which nobody was at that time.
Right.
Or at least no one would claim that, except in a general metaphysical sense. Everything is Kundalini. But but what's the Kriya? Well, no one's going to say. So he was a rebel, and he was appropriate for the 60s in a way, which is the border he came at. He came in the border as a rebel, not a saint, not perfect, not balanced in many ways, but he did what he said, which is, I'm going to deliver you everything that I know and teach teachers. And so I said that attracted me, because I was always teaching, mentoring, from grade school on. I was doing some kind of mentoring. And he sort of, how do you say, not passed the test, but was something very different on the block. And so from the day one when I met him, he just looked at me and he said, you're a teacher. I started teaching the next day.
No kidding.
Yeah, I had a really long training. But then over the years, I became the head of training for Kundalini Yoga, and founded the Kundalini Research Institute, and all the archives for meditation, gathered up a few thousand forums, started testing things and saying, well, what can we see when we put them on an EEG? What do we do if they're in a lab? How does it affect heart rate variation, our ability to be social? How does it affect problems that people have, depressions, addictions, all this? And I integrated it into all the kind of therapeutic work that I did, which I do to this day. And so I still
I think that's fascinating.
keep
Wasn't
a
there
certain number of hours for coaching and this, which mostly is on, majority of the time now is on Skype or some other kind of thing, because I travel a lot. But as I was doing all my training and therapies, I'd be called in for, here's the hard case, or here's the guy who's been doing therapy for 8 years and it's complicated. And I have a presupposition, which is, A, start with the person. B, it's not about the techniques. You have to figure out what is real within the construct and the being of that person. So I don't have anything, I don't believe in selling anything or pushing. It's more like attaining a sensitivity and then being catalytic. So my analogy is usually a lot of stones on the side of a mountain. It looks really hard to move, all those heavy stones, and they've been there a long time. It's like old traumas. But if you can pick the right stone, you just move it a little bit, whole thing moves. Because gravity's already there, stone's already there, momentum is already there. So instead of trying to fit it into something, it's more like you have to be shaped by the encounter, the authentic encounter with the person. So
that's work with that momentum that's already there.
Yeah, and so I like it because, again, that's that boundary effect. It's where two unique beings come together in a process that uses lots of techniques that are very interesting to use. In the now, look, when I started, yoga and yogurt couldn't be distinguished. They didn't know. Let's do some yoga. They thought you wanted to eat something.
Get some of that healthy ice cream.
Yeah, and now it's pretty much mass market. So now you get a large percentage that is mercantilized, or idealized in a way too. You get groups and silos of people, and it's just fascinating to watch. In the Western way, where something is now absorbed, and you're seeing yoga selling stereo sets and things, right? From kind of where it was, but all of it is this access to a potential that's in us. And the short of it, if we're not near your break here, in the yoga system, you've got like pranas and apanas, chi, this kind of way of modeling things with meridians and such. So all of that, pranas, apanas, all the different kinds of things, are the way that the body and the somatic intelligence codes action, the next thing to do, the momentum of choices that you're making. So think of it as the schemas that are always there. Okay?
Yeah.
And in Kundalini, is not an energy like prana. It's actually an urge of development. It is a kind of natural, like a plant going from leaves and buds and then blooming, right?
Yeah.
So Kundalini was the process of literally awareness. So at each chakra, we talk about chakras or centers. At each center, you have an increased capacity for integrating a broader expanse of the local things, your experience and the relationships and such, and a broader sector of wholeness or non-locality. So where locality and non-locality, in proportion to each other, come together in a clarity of self, there is a constant rising of awareness and a capacity to reorganize all that stuff, the pranas and apanas. So when Kundalini rises, that's what the word's for it, when you have this change, it's intriguing because then there is almost a spontaneous realignment of a lot of these patterns that seem relevant at one level. You get to the sort of next level or style of understanding, and suddenly what couldn't be moved is moved. So I have to try to find different words for things, so you can use certain forces and patterns with pranas and meridians and stuff, or you can use the power of presence, which is not a force. So you always have two complementary processes in our experience of being human.
Yeah.
Dealing with all that we don't know and all that we do, all that's local and all that's non-local. Dealing with it with, I know this and I can be incredibly precise about the forces and the angles and the mechanisms. Or I have to cultivate a savoring of the unknown in a way that allows manifestation, which has to occur as wholeness itself. And if you break after the break, you're going to have a break, right?
In a minute, keep going.
Okay.
We get to decide when that is.
Okay.
Keep going.
Then it's kind of the same way. A lot of good science is all about reduction down to a mechanism, tracing the mechanism, finding its complexities, testing it, and so on. And we have done a lot of really good stuff with that. Okay. And but there's never been, until just recently, the beginning of a way to think of, well, could you have something that's a whole, that's a global thing, that cannot be reduced to parts or a mechanism?
And what is that?
There's literally never been anything that starts to let us model that is. I mean, we have some things with, parts and wholes, like with Bose-Einstein condensates, where we take atoms way down to a super, super, super low temperature, and they, in a sense, lose or merge their identities, and then you can see how each little part and the whole acts as one. So you can see stuff like that.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. But what if you had something where literally you could say, if we could perceive it as a whole, we can literally understand what's happening down in the parts level, and we can actually see forces, effects, causalities, right? That you can't create by any amount of calculation from the parts themselves. Now, philosophically, people have often said this should exist, or certainly experiencers of meditation and philosophers, a lot of people will say, oh yeah, it comes from nothing into something, from being into becoming.
Yeah.
But we haven't had anything other than sort of metaphysical thinking in depth about that from a science point of view would let us explore that. Now, some of the most recent stuff with foundational work in quantum mechanics has at least pointing in that direction.
Well, I want to stop you there and pick that up after the break, but I want to say a couple of things about that before we go. That brings us back to maybe a final comment from you for this segment on yoga and meditation. You said a lot of things there that make me think about the very nature of scientific inquiry since the Middle Ages has been to fragment and segment things and specialize. And so the work you do on the periphery, on the fringes of trying to reconnect where those disciplines actually overlap and feed and speak to one another, I think is important when you're talking about finding the whole in order to be able to understand the mechanism and working of the parts. I'm reminded of a phrase in Goethe in Faust when he says he's devoted his life to rummaging in phrases. He's been studying philosophy and history and theology and mathematics and all of the disciplines and has been rummaging in phrases trying to find a unified image of the cosmos, and he can't do it, and he decides he's going to go to magic or the study of transformations to do it, and that this will be able to unify the things that he's been studying and give him some coherence. And when I teach world religion classes, I talk to my students about what I think these practices are, these traditions. When we talk about what is a mythology, what is a religion, I think these are very ancient technologies that have been developed for the accessing and expanding of symbolic and mythological consciousness. And they're algorithms, right? That if folks do this, then this, then this, and this, it will produce an outcome which will enhance and alter awareness. And Houston Smith said about yoga that it's as much as anything, it's about the removing of limitations, and limitations from what? A deep desire that people have for being, joy, and knowledge. And this is not knowledge like a bunch of facts so you can win on Jeopardy, but a knowledge of which the knowing of gives one knowledge of everything, right? So this knowing of the whole. Being doesn't mean staying alive forever and not dying. Being means a quality of existence that is full and complete and fully present, something you said early in our conversation today. And joy is not happiness. This is bliss, which is another phrase you used today when you were talking about a kind of manifested integrity. And so Houston Smith said that the goal of all yogic traditions is to remove the limitations in one's thinking, in one's perception, in one's behavior that keep one from experiencing unbounded, limitless joy, being, and knowledge that is already a part of one's nature. It is already one's Brahman consciousness. We just have been separated from it mercilessly through culture and bad thinking and bad eating and bad practices and everything else. But yoga is to remove those limitations and reintroduce us to that wisdom that already exists in ourselves. And so I guess the two final questions before we go to break, is that somewhat a coherent understanding or congruent understanding of your understanding of yoga? And does Kundalini even remotely work in that kind of realm, or is it something other entirely?
Yes and yes would be the short answer.
I love giving you these either-or questions that you don't take the bait on. I should learn.
Yes and yes. I mean, Goethe had the instinct that there is a wholeness that if you could perceive its very deep, meta wholeness, you would somehow understand the function of all the parts and why the parts even would come to existence.
Sure.
And he tried in his days studying plants and different things to try to make some sense of that. So yeah, there is a deep instinct that there is some aspect of being human that involves both how we deal with parts and create wholes, and how we can manifest wholes themselves and how they affect the parts. So to me, the goal of yoga is to become more human. What happens when you have the limitations? You have a facility in taking off one belief and trying on another until you have the right fit, let's say. What happens? Well, then you're ready to embrace the next set of constraints, because without the constraints, your creativity is not going to flourish. So you have to love constraints. Otherwise, you're basically saying theologically, God really goofed and made a creation. Why bother? Let's just be all non-dual and out there somewhere.
Point, yeah.
And so people think somehow if you get all non-dual, it's going to solve everything and people will be compassionate. No, because there needs to have this awareness that comes in the self that can entertain the dynamic of what Goethe was seeing, this inner wholeness, and the constraints, and wonderfully and gratefully accept those constraints.
Within the individual, yeah.
Just like an artist, and you go up and you get a beautiful piece of marble, the type of marble you haven't seen before. Now you have to master your own self and that material, and even the thing that you were imaging and that you might want to bring forth is in some dynamic interaction with you. So at that boundary again, between the constraints and the freedom, lies an awareness that serves the self to experience yourself as a human being.
Wow.
So that's where I would lie on that.
Well said. One more question before the break?
Sure.
On Kundalini? I'm really interested in the serpent imagery, and if I have my research correct, and if not, I'm going to fire all my research team immediately. But if I have my research correct, the Kundalini spine, where this energy travels up, has two aspects, and they are Ida and Pingala. Do I have this correct? And that they have a twin energy that can split off into almost masculine and feminine archetypes that work in tandem to energetically move up and down the chakra pattern system to that expansiveness you were talking about. When one moves up, that moves along these two currents. And how do they work together, I guess is the question.
Big, deep question. But here's the simplest answer, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So remember I was saying that there's various models of how action happens. Because, prana means an ability to have an action.
Right.
And there's different qualities of that action that we then say, well, different kinds of prana have certain kinds of actions.
Right.
So a hiccup has a different name for a certain prana, and a blink an eye has a different prana, and so on.
Okay.
All right. So if you look at, take it back to the body, to the subtle somatic presence that you have through this particular instrument, this body and nervous system, right? All right, your prana and apana that you were speaking of, or the Ida and the Pingala, two different channels of this kind of thing, is about how you position all of your resources, both gross and subtle, in order to do the next thing. I mean, just sort of keep it simple like that.
Okay.
So, I went to hear some local bluegrass music last night, and on my way over there, I could feel my body was anticipating. And it was shifting a certain way about my feelings, my alertness, my hunger, imaginations, different things, right? So mostly we're not trained to look at kind of just what is. We are part of prana and everything else is a slight anticipation.
Yeah. As
we go forward. That's where we're good at short-term anticipation anyway, because we have to rally our resources. We have a finite set of resources. So the pattern of pranas and apanas, channels that are mapped in different ways in Chinese and Hindu and other systems, right, are kind of an image of that. It's the habit pattern of preparation. So now, imagine someone goes and they're used to encountering the world in a certain way. Their expectation becomes relatively habitual or fixed. Then the Ida and Pingala, the two types, and then the many other kinds of pranas that go with this, form a pattern, and we tend to follow those patterns. It's like you're going to
neural net.
If you're going to go fight the war, but you fight the last war instead. You're in this place, but you wake up and you thought you were in the other hotel room. We have this imprint from the brain, but they see in the subtle body. Now, Kundalini is, traditionally it would be said, you take all of these two energies, these two qualities, pranas and apanas, and the different channels on the two sides,
gross and subtle material,
and you bring them together, quote, in the central channel. So the key phrase is always used. So when all these different patterns are suddenly brought together, meaning coming to neutral, so all the energy is there, and my pull to the right and my pull back over here on the left, at the level of my third chakra, some chakra, it's pulled to the center, and for a moment there's a stillness. That still point, that 0 point, is the condition for the beginning of the operation of Kundalini. So first these guys get sorted, and various techniques bring those to a momentary stillness.
This could be breath. There's lots of different things. Yeah.
Sound is most powerful. Breath, different exercises. Okay. That's right. And then once that happens, this flow of awareness, this ability to allow what is not anticipated
The ability to unfurling of this curled serpent.
That's right. And that's why the images like serpents are there, because what's a serpent? It means you take off the skin and you grow. Or in the Chinese, it's a dragon with huge powers. They have different types of dragons. And all the mythology goes on and on. But what does it just mean? It means you continue to grow, to expand past what your old limitation or skin was. So rather than say staying at the same level, and getting more and more precise about it, so I can get better and better at arranging the furniture in my house and being a decorator. I can be incredibly on the path of decoration, and path of tea, the path of whatever.
Yeah.
But then that's different than understanding how to build a whole building,
right?
Or to build a city, or to forget cities altogether. These are different levels of both skills and awareness, right? So Kundalini is that transformation where we are constantly making the infinite intimate, where we make the unknown expected without knowing what we're expecting. And that's a very interesting phrase. It comes up in every tradition, that when you allow this thing we're calling Kundalini, this core feeling of awareness as a human, it's what it is. When that starts to dawn, how do you know it? Well, people surprise you. There's a joy about this. There's a recognizing of what to do with your foot on this next step. It's not that you now have a big cosmic scheme. And a lot of times we get abstract about this rather than the lived flow. Now, this is why in the traditions of Kundalini, you go and you have people quote it all the time. They say, when Kundalini rises, you enjoy, quote, spontaneous Kriya. And this goes all over the place. Kriya means an action that is grounded in the earth, integrates the heaven, and comes from a continuous flow of the human heart. So a Kriya completes heaven and earth coming together in the choice you're making right now. That's Kriya. Spontaneous, because each moment when you're fully local and non-local, when you're on the bar, when you're feeling all the ocean and the river, at that point, it's unique. So of course it can't be repeated.
Right.
And every time you try to repeat some creativity and you're going to reproduce Einstein, you're going to reproduce J-Lo or somebody, you're going to reproduce it. You can imitate it and you can enjoy some of the sensations, but you're not that.
Gauguin said that all art is either revolution or plagiarism, and I think this is speaking in some sense to what you're talking about.
Yes, and they're both wonderful.
Yeah.
They have different qualities, just like the prana systems and the meridians and the body,
I believe,
and the awareness system.
I believe plagiarism is wonderful too. I wouldn't have an academic career myself without it, but that's a different story.
Anyway, so that's none of it.
We're going to go to break, but lastly, I guess I'll say the symbol of the serpent as so important in what we were just talking about. As a professor of mythological studies, the serpent, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, symbols of transformation and wisdom in our for people, and a symbol of wisdom, of archaic wisdom, very much because it's a symbol of transformation and regeneration, and of the shedding of skin and the taking on of the new self within one life. The bear in its hibernation, another symbol for the same reason. Any animal that dies, the butterfly, first animal painted in Chauvet Cave. Again, an animal that dies and transforms, and there's wisdom in that our ancestors saw as significant for the dying and rebirth of the self.
And I love listening to the way you describe it. It's beautiful, and that's why I like to live in that boundary of transformation. Why? If you, Andrew, have entered that space of this awakened serpent, of this mix of uniqueness, of spontaneous presence, then what you would expect of me right here is going to be equally open, because your eyes are clear. So you, without any effort, without force, without intending me to be anything, if I hang out with you, there's going to be a transformative space.
Yeah.
And this is why there's always, at certain points in history, through synchronicity or design or whatever it is, right, a certain cauldron formed with a group that has this kind of catalytic chaos right at that edge, because they don't know. They're willing to not know what you must be. And this invites what I call true dialogue and a true discovery.
Being willing to not know.
It's a very important concept.
Fascinating. We're going to go to our last break and then finish up talking about the quantum stuff and what's going on at Chapman and what's in the future. Does that sound good for you?
Sounds good.
You're listening to On the Block Radio, folks. We're going to go to our last break and then bring this thing home, talking about the quantum revolution with our friend Gurucharan Singh Khalsa. And we'll be back right after these words.
You've been listening to On the Block. Of all of the voices in your head, thanks for making ours one of them. Be right back.
Top 5 weirdest facts about quantum physics. Number 5. The emptiness of atoms. If your fist was as large as the nucleus of an atom, then the atom would be as big as St. Paul's Cathedral. Atoms are almost 100% empty space. If atoms had no empty space, and all those vast empty cathedrals were compressed into one single bundle of nuclei, it would be the size of a teaspoon of sugar, but weigh about 5 billion tons. About 10 times the weight of all humans currently on Earth. This does happen naturally in the cosmos, with the formation of a neutron star. The superdense mass is left over after a certain kind of supernova sucks the empty atom space away from the nuclei. Number 4. Our missing universe. There are approximately 100 billion galaxies in the cosmos. Each of those galaxies contains between 10 million and 1 trillion stars. Our sun, a rather small yellow dwarf star, weighs around a billion tons, and most others are much larger. There's a lot of visible matter in the universe, but this only accounts for about 2% of its mass. We know there is more because we can detect its gravity. Despite the huge amount of visible matter, it's nowhere near enough to account for the gravitational pull we can see exerted on other galaxies. The other stuff is called dark matter, and there seems to be around 6 times as much as ordinary matter. To make matters even more confusing, the rest is something else entirely called dark energy, which is necessary to explain the apparent expansion of the universe. Problem is, no one has any idea what dark matter or dark energy really is. Number 3. The speed of light is not constant? The speed of light in a vacuum is always the same, 300,000 kilometers per second. However, light does not always travel through a vacuum. In water, for example, photons travel around 3/4 that speed. The slowest light ever recorded was traveling at 17 meters per second, about 38 miles an hour, through rubidium cooled to almost absolute zero, when it forms a strange state of matter called a Bose-Einstein condensate. Light can also be brought to a complete stop in the same mode. Number 2. Infinite dimensions. According to the current standard model of cosmology, the observable universe containing all the billions of galaxies is just one of an infinite number of universes existing side by side, like soap bubbles in foam. Because they are infinite, every possible history must have played out. But more than that, the number of possible histories is finite, because there have been a finite number of events with a finite number of outcomes. The number is huge, but it is finite. So imagine this current event, right now, where this author writes these words, I read them, and you hear them, must have happened an incomprehensible number of times. There is one universe out there where I was able to do this entire video in one take. Number 1. Quantum entanglement. Scientists now have been able to achieve teleportation of information. It was shown that it's possible to transfer some information between photons. A laser pulse is used to create a quantum state known as entanglement, which essentially lets 2 atoms displace properties from one to the other. The information would travel faster than the speed of light. It would instantaneously displace properties, even if the particles were at separate ends of the universe.
Thank you for listening to On the Block. We talk to smart people so you don't have to.
All right, folks, we are back for our final segment with Gurucharan, Singh, Khalsa, and we started our conversation talking about physics, quantum physics in particular. We went into a discussion of about understanding the whole to be able to see forces and understand parts. And I made a comment in the beginning about this quantum revolution, what's happening in the study of theoretical physics. We had Amit Goswami come speak at our Anthropology of Consciousness conference, because there's a lot going on in the study of quantum physics that affects the study of consciousness. And there's a lot of terms that are thrown around. Is consciousness fundamental to the universe, as Max Planck and others said, or is it an emergent property? What do we mean by these terms, non-locality and entanglement? And there's some exciting work that's been done by the physicists, but a lot of us out here don't understand the math. And so we end up having to have these things translated for us into popular language. And some of the folks doing that are doing it responsibly, others are not. And so over the past several years, there's a lot of noise around the quantum revolution. We all know that something's happening there, and we all know it has profound implications, not only for our understanding of the material world, but for our understanding of everything we've been discussing so far. And what I hear is that you're working with a group of folks at Chapman that's really trying to put a handle on this and say, can we design experiments that can take us into quantifying these things and really getting a look at this stuff, where it isn't just entirely speculative or done on the page in equations, but we can actually design experiments to look at some of these things. And can you talk a little bit about that and what's going on, and maybe start with, for our audience, giving them just maybe a brief, we only have a few minutes left, lesson in what quantum theory is and how to understand these terms like non-locality and entanglement. Yeah, in 4 minutes or less.
4 minutes. No, that's good.
Go.
But, your questions are always rich and there are many nuances. So let me try and focus it a bit. There's a new book coming out by Penrose. Penrose is an extremely well-known physicist. Mm-hmm. He's going to be one of our keynote speakers in a big conference we're having at Chapman in September. And so I recommend it, because what he looks at, and something I think you'd be fascinated by, is he talks about the influence of fantasy and metaphor and illusion and so on in the world of physics and quantum physics.
Oh, interesting.
And cosmologies.
Okay.
And he points out that a lot of people get so... you get very certain, like quantum mechanics. So there's quantum physics, which is the larger sense of physics.
Yeah.
There's foundational physics, looking at the very axioms of how we understand what's real, and there's quantum mechanics, which is a way of dealing and doing equations that every student in physics learns, in college. And if you look at the
computational,
computational effects, there you can say that there's never been in human history that we know of any mechanism or theory of computation that has been so successful. Essentially, we've never found anything wrong that it predicts. So it may not predict everything, and it's probably, you can argue how complete it is.
Yeah.
But think of this fact. Roughly 2/3 of the economy of the United States comes out of the 1920s and what followed from the new perspectives given by quantum mechanics, quantum physics, applied in every different realm now, right? We're doing it in genetics, medicine, healing, in economics, in planetary exploration, in iPhones.
I
mean, you wouldn't have any of that stuff if it weren't for these understandings that ask us to pay attention to how we ask nature. And in a lot of the physics at the foundational level is kind of like that. Well, what does it mean to have a measurement? How do we query that? So it has a lot to do with statistics and probabilities and the way we measure. And that's where the conversation gets to be really arcane. But on the psychological level, it's sort of the same thing. How do I measure? How do I ask of nature, right? What's there? And there's a whole very well-defined way that you usually do it in science. You commented about that earlier. The image I have, by the way, is, you could study an egg by breaking it into pieces again and again. And then you look at all the little pieces and you calculate how you could make the whole egg, and algorithms for that, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And we're pretty good at that. Right?
Yeah.
The only problem is if we didn't wait long enough for a chicken to come out, we might not know there's a chicken. So one is you leave it whole.
Yeah.
And you see a property, evolve. Now, granted, we know chickens come out of eggs, right? So now we can look back at a mechanism with eggs. But as an analogy, if you just take it, one way of studying or asking the question is first to go down to parts and break it up and then try to reconstruct it out of algorithms. It's a very powerful mechanism. On the other hand, you might miss things that could only be seen if you left it whole, so that the inherent complexity of it or whatever it is sort of reveals itself.
It's like ripping apart a seed for an oak tree or something, as opposed to allowing it to grow.
So at a foundational level, when you think about wholes and parts, and this is yoga, parts and wholes, it's a lot of philosophy. How does the whole relate to me? How do I relate to the whole globe? That whole issue, which is becoming a pretty powerful issue on all kinds of levels. Politically, very strong. Do we unify? Do we divide? Are we separate? How do we deal with the boundaries between all of us? So I was saying that there wasn't a lot of good models from a sort of science point of view to start dealing with that. Chapman has one of the best foundational physics and a good computational group, and several other really great areas of physics, and they are being recognized worldwide for this. And I'm just fortunate to be able to hang out with these brainiacs.
And it's like guys like Manos was there, right?
And at least try to understand a little bit of how this might apply and work in humans too. So a lot of it is just hardcore, what I'd call hardcore physics. How do you use better optics and sensors and things like that. But there's a number of people who are involved in this who are also very interested in human questions as well. And that's
there's folks like Manos Kafatos
and that's why where I come in. And two of the principals are Jeff Tollickson, Yakir Haranoff are the leaders. In all that. And Yakir is the genius's genius. He's just astounding in the depth of his intuition and the kindness of his heart. So I just want to give a shout out to one of the greats. I very
there again
happy
as a person
to even try to think about this stuff. Now, the one thing I'll point out, just to keep our topic limited, we need something that says, is there any mechanism? Is there any way we could measure the properties of holism? Is there any way that we could see what exists under a whole system, and therefore start to be able to talk about it without breaking the egg?
Right.
Okay. So Yakir is the one who developed and has promoted a very hot topic out there now, 30 years after he actually did it, which is called weak measurement. And it's a way to ask of nature or ask of a quantum system something about it and know something even though you don't disturb the system. You know how we always say if I observe it, it changes it, so your next observation will be a little more random, and it'll have a wave of different possibilities that comes out. So it's a practical question. Okay, you disturb the system, and then you create this ensemble effect of different effects. But it turns out it's possible to have certain ways of creating measurement that don't disturb the system. Now, when you do that, you can do certain things. So, for example, you can look at an individual quantum system and measure all of its variables. In the past, you couldn't do that. If you got one, all the rest would be distributed. So there's a way to kind of look and say, oh, wait a minute, what's actually going on with all of that? Now, that's just astounding in itself. Now, they did a recent experiment that's been published and done. And for listeners, so you don't drive off in your car or something if you're listening, just think of this. You do an experiment. This is a recent one. And over here, we'll call it a box. It means we're looking in to say, is there anything in the box, And you use any measurement you're going to use.
There is something in the box, a dead
magnetic
cat.
Field, polarization, different ways we measure. You can say, okay, what is that? We want to know what's in there. Okay, so you look in that box with all your different measures, and there's nothing in there. It's like, nope, nothing there. Yeah, nothing. And you look in the other box. Now you got another box, okay? Nothing in there. So then you got two boxes which there's nothing in them by any of your normal measurements, right? the mass. Now you measure both boxes without looking in them. So now you're measuring the whole system as it is.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? So you haven't done the hard measurement to open and look at that box. Instead, you're looking at the whole system itself behaving. When you do that, you do all three things at once. These are three experiments that are simultaneous. Box, and the whole. What you suddenly see is a force. So between the two nothings, there's nothing in them. If you measure it so you're not disturbing it, you suddenly see that there's acting this huge force. And you can prove that it is not reducible to any parts, no matter how you describe what you think is the system. Inside the little boxes or something, right? You can't derive that force. So suddenly you have right before your eyes that there's been hidden in plain sight an entire realm of manifestations from the whole that you cannot see by any way of breaking the egg and turning it into parts. And that this is an active and a causal force. Now, what does all that mean? Well, if we go to the woo level now, okay, it means suppose you had something that was whole, and that, like a thought, let's say, not just from the different neurons and this and the glial cells and all that, you've got a mechanism, but what if there is a free choice? What if there is a uniqueness? What if there is something that's a property of relationship between whole? We can now have what we're calling an atom of holism that says, here's a whole that you cannot get to by any reductionist approach. And you can't, but the measures when you look in the box and do the reduction thing, or the measures when you see the whole system, are complementary. In other words, if you're seeing one of them, right, then you're not measuring this one. If you're measuring this one, you can't see the other one. So remember that thing we talked about philosophically, that as a human, we have like these two realms, local and non-local. These non-local connections, right, which if you look too hard in the old way, you can't see them, they disappear. If you hold it just in the right way, it suddenly appears what's going on. You can use the forces that come from mechanism, or the force that comes from manifestation. Manifestation comes by the specialized manner of observation in relationship to the question you're asking of reality. Suppose something like that. Now we're in the woo here. But suppose something like that applied when you, as an observer, observed your own self. How you observed yourself. Demanding the mechanism, the pressure, the thing that made you very precise, like in pranas and apanas.
Yeah.
Or the way of holding the whole system gently, where you have an unknowing and yet you recognize forces and connections and powers that are there. It turns out you can use both, and they have certain dynamical relationships to each other. So to make this really practical for your audience, suppose I was going to make a healing on a body, and one place I'm going to push this meridian and push this over here and boost up one of the functions of your kidneys and so on and so forth, like we do. And thank God we do. When I came back to Portland like 6.5 years ago, I had a near death. I was dying, and I was at Good Sam over here. And if they hadn't pushed this and done that, I suspect
might not be here.
That might be so good. But at the same time, when I was going through that and having the shrikes and doing all this stuff that you do when you're pretty much supposed to go away, right? I also was in that space of this other kind of thing where I was holding it very gently. The doctor said, hey, you realize you're going to die. You got about 20 minutes. We can't hold you. I said, no. I said, it's okay. He said, no, let me tell you again. Yes, I know you're under fever. And I had 5 fever or something, 6 fever. And I said, no, it's this is my death, right? Not yours?
Wow.
And he sort of said, well, yes, of course. Of course. I said, then it's good. Because whatever challenge I have of his mind is my perfect challenge. So I'm fine with this. And he just shook his head. Now I lived. Now, there were 2 things happening at the same time. So we were interfering the best we could with mechanism, which wasn't working very well. And then there was also this other factor that literally would not be seen by any measure that they could apply.
Yeah.
And just like in the physics, it literally wouldn't be seen unless I had a way of sensing the whole, which was me, the hospital, my lifetimes, the people I'm related to, what I have to do. So in the physics, to end with a flurry and the phantasm here of physics, the people who work on exploring the holisms that we haven't been able to see and to really mathematize what that means, one way of approaching that has been what they call the two-time vector reformulation of quantum mechanics, which means, in brief, that you can think of, you have to measure a certain way, and you essentially have a vector, a wave from the future and a wave from the past, a history and a destiny vector, two waves that come together in the present, so that this moment is being a witness to your future choices and your past simultaneously.
Yeah, this is what we
live, and they live together in very particular ways that completely reformulate how we think about what uncertainty means, for example. So it doesn't mean, it specifically means you can't just go and guess the future, because that would violate all sorts of physics. But you could witness the choice and the complex of this flow in the present. So one of the things we're exploring then is the nature of being into becoming, and manifestation into what is as whole, and mechanisms about what happens with these parts.
The move from the potential to the actual.
Yeah, and
back.
now to actually do that, now the problem with quantum mechanics is because there hasn't been this kind of development before, you've got, 100 good ideas about quantum mechanics. That's why they say we know the quantum mechanics, the actual calculation. But as far as the quantum theory, there's so many theories, and none of them are distinguishable. They don't have experiments that say, okay, that one works and that one doesn't. And so a lot of people just say, I'm just going to go back and I know this works and it's a solid and all that's just speculation, forget it. Well, we haven't had a way to just start to ask the questions in a manner that presents to us in a usable way that. Now, if we did the healing example of pushing the kidney and doing this, that's getting a cure, getting a healing from parts, right? If we could somehow invoke this innate ability to hold gently the whole, it would show up, you might say, in whatever we measured, it would already be there. It would show up through all your cells at once, because it's from the whole.
Yeah.
It's not the parts sending a wave and then this one pushed on this one. It would suddenly change the condition in which all that stuff is happening everywhere at once. Now, we don't understand all these mechanisms. I'm not saying that all that's done by any means, but I'm saying that there's kind of a breakthrough, which is very hot and is being applied in practical ways to all kinds of technology at the same time. But it will be fascinating, and so we're looking for funding, of course. It's what all good research people do. Because mostly people want to fund the the new iPhone, the new bomb, the new this, the new that, something like that, which is great. But there is a group of us that are trying to actually look at applications to the sort of larger, almost metaphysical questions of how do these parts and wholes relate? What does it mean in terms of consciousness modeling?
So if I hear you right, it's not, the question is not whether Schrodinger's cat is alive or dead. It's that when we look at it as an entire system, we're looking at the forces that move between those two states, and then what that says about our relationship to ourself and to these two states of being. Not trying to understand the mechanism of what makes something die as much as understanding that second part.
Right, and if there's a lot of ways to approach it. One way is to say that what is fundamental, like if you picked a particle, whatever particle is fundamentally non-local to begin with. Entanglement, the word you used at the very beginning of the interview. The normal is EPR entanglement. That form of entanglement, you take two things and you create them together, or they're very close together and they get interlocked in some sense, okay? And then if you, quote, separate them spatially, they will still be affecting each other over pretty large distances and stuff. And so you can get some
space and time.
Yeah, so you can get some reproduction of that state, like teleportation means reproducing the quantum state that's in one place and the other. It doesn't like move there, but it's already kind of there and you reproduce it. But it's very limited. It's fragile. It's jealous of having too many things work with it. And you have to start locally. All right. This other type of holism, you don't have to start locally. It's an existing connection that can exist between things that have never been in the same time, planet, area, nothing. There's already a subtle connection. So it's quite different. And in order to do that, you have to reconceptualize what time means. So it takes us, so the research we're doing takes us all the way back to first practical measurements and applications of new ways of looking at statistics and magnification, really practical stuff, like being able to use light microscopes and see way down below the optical limit that we used to think we could do. I mean, incredible expansion of sensors, for example. Practical stuff, right?
Yeah.
But also it touches on what you might want to call, Shimoni called it experimental metaphysics, because you're looking at a foundational question of how can we capture, in some manner, being into becoming, manifestation and mechanism. And to me, when we do that, you and I, as people in these bodies, we're already doing that experiment. We each are an experiment that queries our nature and all of reality, always in these two complementary ways. Whether we're sensing that and how we learn to have a dialogue between these two aspects of ourself is the wisdom school question replaced in a modern physics context.
And it seems like if this work you're doing pans out and we are able to translate it over into the realms of the sociological and psychological, that you're saying there's this possibility for a kind of global spontaneous awakening to occur. I mean, I know that's back into the woo, but that's what I'm hearing.
No, but it contributes to, it's us having that conversation. And it's not that we all buy a new idea as much as we're starting to see in areas that we trust. Wait, we know we can talk about some of this in philosophy terms, in spiritual terms, and psychological transformation. We have those terms. Do we have terms that the new god of science, would allow in the courtroom? And the answer is, well, we're starting to. And then, now, maybe that's going to lead, I don't know, but maybe it'll lead to what I would consider a kind of naturalism of what it means to have human nature, rather than separating all these things. So someone asked me, I said, well, so I don't know how controversial I should be, but they'll say, well, God knows everything. And I like to say, well, I don't know. I learned that God and me and God are one in some way. There's some I-thou relationship that I can experience in the clarity of my kindness, my compassion, my action in the present. Right?
Yeah.
Some way. And if I really do that, it would be better to say that conceptually God would be blind until I make an action, so he, she, it, he should can know. Okay? Because I'm not separate from that. There's no separation from it, except in the wholeness. If you take all of what is, which we kind of mean God is and what isn't, however you think of it.
Sure.
But if you take that wholeness, the great wholeness, it can't know anything without the constraints of a local embodiment. So there's this incredible dance that goes on. And so someone said, so wait, but then God knows everything's going to happen is good for you. I said, well, yeah, but look, I'm more playful than that. I figure God is winging it, and you're the wings. And every time you flap with your will and your choice in this, you're starting to be able to map the currents of the sky you fly in. Yeah, a little abstract, but it really gives humans a possibility.
I think it was Sagan who said, sorry to step on your last line there. I think it was Carl Sagan who said that through us, and I think he meant all sentient life, that through us the universe is becoming self-aware. And I think it's just another way of saying what you're saying here. That is a playful and mystical, but also sort of profoundly quote unquote scientific way of looking at things.
So as much as I am hesitant in some ways to leave this beautiful place called Portland and Portlandia, where I look on the slow flowing river of the Willamette and the amazing trees and the amazing community that's here too in Portland. It's full of creative people and writers and professors and so on. And I'm going down to Southern California. where it's different.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
It's different. But I think my interests will remain the same, and I'll do more writing about all of this and try to get some books out for the public to really look at the edge of a kind of revolution, as you called it, that allowed us to reconceptualize some of the things hidden in plain sight, some of the ways that we can heal and be together, some of the ways that we're going to have to learn to deal with each other on a global perspective. And I don't think it'll sell us some grand idea. I think for me it's more about how can each of us have an experience in which we can test what that means uniquely in our lives. And number two, what does it mean in terms of the conversation of science starting to bring in new levels of holism, connectedness, as fundamental to our understanding of reality. And that is going to be a quake as large as the one in the 1920s as we extend the reach. And it's quantum mechanics and all the science that we're dealing with is a golden straitjacket. It's a beautiful, perfect straitjacket. Okay.
Thomas Kuhn's Fundamental Structure of Scientific Revolution. I love it. Gurucharan Singh Khalsa, thank you for being with us. We so appreciate it. And good luck down at Chapman.
Thank you so much.
You're listening to On the Block Radio, folks. Our guest has been Gurucharan Singh Khalsa, and we will see you on the other side.
You've been listening to On the Block Radio with Andrew Gurovich. The show is produced in Portland, Oregon by Michael DiNapoli at MD Productions. Theme music by Moving the Mountain. Closing music by Jonathan Oak. Look us up on the web at ontheblockradio.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Don't forget to tune in next week for a brand new episode. Previous episodes can be found on our website. Thanks for listening.
Oh, you're beautiful kitty kitties. Oh, look at you out there. Beauty like a bolt of light in a darkened hallway. New minds looking at this world, at our lives, with the perspective of apocalypse children. Standing dusty in the barren highways, standing broken before the fathers who are meant to make us whole, but who only lied to us about what it meant to be a man, about what it meant to be a woman, about what it meant to be a child.